Okay, so hey guys, and welcome back to another Sport This Week video. And in today's video, I've got basketball, tennis, baseball, ice hockey, NFL, rugby, football, UFC, boxing, Moto GP, cricket, and yeah, I believe that is all the sports news. If you're new around here and you haven't yet subscribed, please do so. Like the video if you do indeed like the video, and let's get straight into it. So, starting off this week, I'm going to start off with the basketball news, where it was the continuation of the preseason. And so Lakers won 124 to 121 versus Warriors. Heat won 118 to 110 versus Rockets. Warriors won 131 to 98 versus Blazers. Heat won 120 to 103 versus Pelicans. Lakers lost 118 to 113 versus Timberwolves. Celtics lost 137 to 134 versus Raptors. Warriors lost 119 to 112 versus Nuggets. And Lakers lost 133 to 86 versus Kings. And yeah, that is all the basketball news. Moving on to the tennis news now, where it was the Acura Classic, where Sakkari lost 2-0 versus Vekic. Swiatek won 2-1 versus Zeng. Badoza won 2-0 versus Shiriko. Swiatek won 2-0 versus Gwoat-Stw. Badoza lost 2-0 versus Collins, and Swiatek won 2-1 versus Pegula. And yeah, that is all the tennis news. Moving on to the baseball news now. Astros won 8-7 versus Mariners. Yankees won 4-1 versus Guardians. Dodgers won 5-3 versus Padres. Dodgers lost 5-3 versus Padres. Astros won 4-2 versus Mariners. Yankees lost 4-2 versus Guardians. Dodgers lost 2-1 versus Padres. Astros won 1-0 versus Mariners. Yankees lost 6-5 versus Guardians. And Dodgers lost 5-3 versus Padres. And yeah, that is all the baseball news. Moving on to the ice hockey news. Bruins won 5-2 versus Capitals. Maple Leafs lost 4-3 versus Canadiens. Maple Leafs won 3-2 versus Capitals. Red Wings won 3-0 versus Canadiens. Red Wings won 5-2 versus Devils. Maple Leafs won 3-2 versus Senators. Bruins won 6-3 versus Coyotes. Canadiens lost 3-1 versus Capitals. Hug has signed a 3-year deal with Golden Knights. Green has retired. Granato has joined Sabres. Milano has signed a 1-year deal with Capitals. And yes, that is all the ice hockey news. Moving on to the NFL news now. Chiefs won 30-29 versus Raiders. Browns trading for Jones. Rule part ways with Panthers. Penny out for the season. Buccaneers lost 20-18 versus Steelers. Dolphins lost 24-16 versus Vikings. Packers lost 27-10 versus Jets. Patriots won 38-15 versus Browns. Rams won 24-10 versus Panthers, and Chiefs lost 24-20 versus Bills. And yes, that is all the NFL news. Moving on to the rugby news now. England won 60-6 versus Samoa. And yes, that is all the rugby news. Only one bit of news for this week. Moving on to the football news now, where the first bit of news is very unfortunate, being Mwepu has been forced to retire due to a heart condition. So I feel very bad for him as a player, just be having to retire so young. I believe he's only like 24, and so I hope there's other opportunities that become available for him to still be in the sport if he wants to still be in the sport. But there's not really too much more I can say other than I feel very sorry for him as he's had to retire. But yes, moving on. Griezmann has joined Atletico Madrid. Forest drew 1-1 versus Villa. Lazio won 4-0 versus Fiorentina. Man City drew 0-0 versus Copenhagen. Haifa won 2-0 versus Juventus. Leipzig won 2-0 versus Celtic. Zagreb drew 1-1 versus Salzburg. Dortmund drew 1-1 versus Sevilla. Chelsea won 2-0 versus Milan. PSG drew 1-1 versus Benfica. Shakhtar drew 1-1 versus Real Madrid. Atletico Madrid drew 0-0 versus Bruges. Napoli won 4-2 versus Ajax. Barcelona drew 3-3 versus Inter. Porto won 3-0 versus Leverkusen. Bayern won 4-2 versus Pleasant. Liverpool won 7-1 versus Rangers. Marseille won 2-0 versus Sporting. Spurs won 3-2 versus Frankfurt. Daly won Player of the Month. Ward won Manager of the Month. Lazio drew 2-2 versus Sturm. Man U won 1-0 versus Armonia. Sociedad won 3-0 versus Sheriff. PSV won 5-0 versus Zurich. Ludogorets won 2-0 versus HJK. Union Berlin won 1-0 versus Malmo. Trabzonspor won 4-0 versus Monaco. Ferencvaros won 2-1 versus Crvena Zvezda. Feyenoord drew 2-2 versus Midtjylland. Arsenal won 1-0 versus Bodo Glimt. Rennes won 1-0 versus Kiev. Ferencvaros won 2-1 versus La Maca. Betis drew 1-1 versus Roma. Union SG drew 3-3 versus Braga. Freiburg won 4-0 versus Nantes. Qarabag drew 0-0 versus Olympiacos. Istanbul Basaksehir won 3-0 versus RFS. Fiorentina won 5-1 versus Hearts. Villarreal won 1-0 versus Vienne. Partizan won 2-0 versus Cologne. Apollon won 1-0 versus AZ. Djurgården won 4-2 versus Ghent. CFR Cluj won 2-0 versus Slavia Prague. Slovan Bratislava drew 3-3 versus Basel. Silkeborg won 5-0 versus FCSB. West Ham won 2-1 versus Anderlecht. Beersheva drew 1-1 versus Lech. Slovakia won 2-1 versus Nice. Dnipro won 2-1 versus Vaduz. Molde won 2-0 versus Shamrock. Sivasspor won 2-1 versus Balakani. Zalgiris won 2-1 versus Pionik. Brentford won 2-0 versus Brighton. Atalanta won 2-1 versus Sassuolo. Atletico Madrid won 1-0 versus Bilbao. Juventus won 1-0 versus Torino. Spurs won 2-0 versus Everton. Leipzig won 3-2 versus Hertha. Wolves won 1-0 versus Forest. Frankfurt won 5-1 versus Leverkusen. Fulham drew 2-2 versus Bournemouth. Leicester drew 0-0 versus Palace. Real Madrid won 3-1 versus Barcelona. Chelsea won 2-0 versus Villa. Arsenal won 1-0 versus Leeds. Man U drew 0-0 versus Newcastle. Southampton drew 1-1 versus West Ham. Liverpool won 1-0 versus Man City. Union Berlin won 2-0 versus Dortmund. Bayern won 5-0 versus Freiburg. Arsenal won 1-0 versus Reading. PSG won 1-0 versus Marseille. And Milan won 2-1 versus Verona. And yes, that is all the football news. A lot of news, as per usual. And we're going to be moving on to a sport which also has a lot of news, being the boxing news. And no, not boxing news yet, my bad. Moving on to the cricket news, and then it'll be the boxing news. Cricket news next. New Zealand won by 9 wickets versus Pakistan. India won by 7 wickets versus South Africa. New Zealand won by 48 runs versus Bangladesh. England won by 8 runs versus Australia. Pakistan won by 7 wickets versus Bangladesh. And Pakistan won by 5 wickets versus New Zealand. And yes, that is all the cricket news. And now we move on to the boxing news, where there is a lot of news this week. And so yeah, starting off, Colley versus Belmedi and Ellison versus Whitaker Hart will fight on the 29th of October. Williams versus Ford, Coe versus Olmeida, and Niashvili versus Rodriguez will fight on the 12th of November. Rakhimov versus Barrett, Hatton Al-Nuami, Yafai, Fiaz, the first guy we interviewed on here, Al-Bushi and Al-Nakibi will fight on the 5th of November. Big card for Fiaz to be on. I'm very excited to see what happens in that. Tate won via TKO in round 7 versus Evans to remain Australian National Boxing Federation Australasian lightweight champion. Biggs won via unanimous decision versus Pizzi to become Australian National Boxing Federation Australasian Super Welterweight champion. Ogden won via TKO in round 1 versus Cameron Hands to become Australian Super Featherweight champion. Nicholson won via unanimous decision versus Jacobs to become Commonwealth Boxing Council Featherweight champion. McKean won via TKO in round 3 versus Tapia to become IBF Intercontinental Heavyweight champion. Tapia won via unanimous decision versus Mayweather to remain WBA Oceania Super Middleweight champion. Paro won via TKO in round 1 versus Jarvis to become WBO Global Super Lightweight Champion. Wildheart won via will fight Canizaro on the 22nd of October. Another person we've had on the channel and another fight I'm very excited for. Halal Ham won via unanimous decision versus DTG. Taylor won via unanimous decision versus Raksu. Wet won via stoppage in round 2 versus Keeley. JMX won via KO in round 3 versus Ginty. Slim won via unanimous decision versus Taylor. Swingler won via KO in round 1 versus Sherdleys. O'Connor won via decision versus Van E. Ryan won via decision versus El Kazi. Leishman won via decision versus Connolly. Price won via TKO in round 4 versus Bielik. Artenstall won via decision versus Sakharov. Fuchs won via decision versus Rueg. Hunter won via decision versus Alvarez. Jones won via decision versus Nard. Dubois won via TKO in round 5 versus Koleva. Baumgartner won via split decision versus Maya to become IBF, IBO, WBC and WBO World Super Featherweight Champion. I can't quite remember what predictions I did for this card, as I did it when they were going to fight before the Queen died, before it got cancelled. So I believe I said Maya to win that fight. And Shields won via unanimous decision versus Marshall to become IBF, WBA, WBC and WBO World Middleweight Champion. and I also believe I said Marshall. So I believe I've taken 2 losses there with the predictions so far. But Shields versus Marshall, and that whole card as a general was an amazing card, and hopefully there'll be more all women's cards in the future to come. Sanchez won via TKO in round 9 versus Negron to become a WBC Continental Americans heavyweight champion. Rodriguez won via decision versus Russell. Plant won via KO in round 9 versus Dirrell, which I did predict right. I might have said round 9 KO as well. I can't remember, but I did predict Plant to win. Wilder won via KO in round 1 versus Helenius. I did say that he'd win via KO, and I said that Wilder would win. I believe I said later rounds, but very impressive by Wilder. Haney won via unanimous decision versus Cambosis Jr. to remain IBF, WBA Super, WBC and WBO World Lightweight Champion, which I did predict bang on. I said unanimous decision win for Haney, and he did it again, outclassed him again, and that proves why he's one of the best boxers around at the moment. And Hardy won via unanimous decision versus Salgado. And yes, that is all the boxing news. Quite a lot, like I said, but we'll be now moving on to UFC news. So Tuivasa will fight Pavlovich on the 3rd of December. Prohaska will rematch Teixeira on the 10th of December. Edgar will fight Gutierrez on the 12th of November. Martinez won via KO in round 2 versus Swanson. Gurasso won via decision versus Arroyo, and that is all the UFC news. Moving on to the final sport now, which is the Moto GP news, where it's the Australian Grand Prix, where Martin was on pole, Marquez started second, and Bagnaia started third. In the end, Rins won, Marquez came second, Bagnaia came third, with Morbidelli, Quartararo, Miller, and Marquez not finishing. And so yeah, that is it for today's video. Hope you did enjoy. Like the video if you did, like the video, subscribe if you're new, and thanks for watching.